Good morning. This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome the witnesses. Certainly thank you for your thoughtful testimony. We're going to be looking forward to hearing it and have an opportunity to ask a number of questions. This hearing originally was planned, and we were going to be talking about an issue that Senator Carper and I are also very concerned about, is just biosecurity and the threats that we face. And with the unfortunate tragic events in Brussels, we thought we'd maybe expand it. We maybe can still pick up on some of those bio threats as well, but we thought we'd like to hold a hearing and really take a look at, what is the root cause that is driving this activity in Europe? What are the implications here in America? In January 2016, we had a foiled plot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin against the Masonic Temple by an individual named Sami Muhammad Hamza. Now, I'd say this was a real success story on the part of the FBI and those individuals, the informants that worked to foil that plot. In the complaint filed against Sami Muhammad Hamza, I've just got 4 little sentences. They're disconnected, but it certainly reveals what's on the minds or the mind of an individual that actually plot to slaughter innocent human beings. This is what he was quoted as saying: "I am telling you, if this hit is executed, it will be known all over the world. The people will be scared and the operations will increase. This way we will be igniting it. I mean, we are marching at the front of the war, and we will eliminate everyone." Now, in his plotting, he was trying to accomplish killing 100 people. And in the complaint, he also said he'd be 100% happy if he was able to kill 30. These threats that Europe is facing, these threats that America are facing because of Islamic terrorists are real, and they're growing. And the purpose of this hearing is really to, again, take a look at the root cause of those problems, see what we need to do here in America to try and keep this nation, our homeland, as safe and secure as possible. I also do have to say, on March 22nd, we did reach out the day after the Brussels hearing to the FBI, also the DHS and the National Counterterrorism Center to have witnesses appear before this committee today. Unfortunately, nobody from any of those departments or agencies agreed to testify, which is disappointing to me. I know Secretary Johnson's on the Hill today having a press conference on additional funding for DHS, which, listen, we want to support the department having the tools, the resources they need to keep this nation safe. I think probably a pretty good way to try and secure those resources would be coming before a committee like this to lay out the reality of what the problem is. So I am disappointed that we don't have a government witness today or witnesses, but I certainly appreciate the fact that you've come here today and are willing to testify. So with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Carter. Thanks, Mr. Watts. I want to start with you because you mentioned, I think the key point here is most of the testimony has been talking about being on defense. You talked about going on offense, but even in talking about going on offense, you're talking about have America go on offense to help Europe be on defense. I want to talk about actually going on offense. I want to talk about the fact that you said that this has been building in Syria and Iraq, and it was inevitable. And as we watch the events unfold here, and yeah, we're pushing ISIS back in Iraq, but they're gaining territory in Syria. They're setting up a stronger base in Libya. They're getting into Afghanistan. We're having Boko Haram and other terrorist organizations affiliate themselves with ISIS. This is growing. I want to talk about an effective offense. And again, I want to just give some indication here. There's a State Department report called the START Report, Study of Terrorism, Response to Terrorism. And let me caveat, I realize these statistics are very uneven. But if you take a look at prior years, up to 9/11, on average, this is the largest measure, on average there were about less than 5,000 fatalities due to terrorism prior to 9/11. In 2012, that report shows there were about 15,000. In 2014, it was about 43,000. Again, I realize the measurement is very difficult on this, but it gives us some indication on how global terrorism is a growing threat. And so if we're all going to just be on defense, I don't see how we can succeed. Just speak about what's a real offense to wipe out this threat, and how long is it going to take?
What I would say is I do like how we're approaching counterterrorism in a lot of these affiliates already. We've already started to take action against the Islamic State in Libya. That's the second most important affiliate that's out there. We will have to pursue special operations force attacks, aggressive joint terrorism task force investigations here in the States, and robust intelligence sharing across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for as long as we live. Everybody in here will have to do that. We will have to watch that. This won't go away. There is no beginning and there is no end. There's only degrees of winning and losing. So I think the notion that we need to put forth, both in our country and particularly in Europe, who seems to only react to these situations, is that a constant offense is the only way to keep them on the defense. I would say that foreign fighter task force tracking is the most essential thing we should be doing, and we should have done. This is what I call countering terrorism now from the third foreign fighter glut. We had a massive ingress of foreign fighters to Afghanistan that later mutated into al-Qaeda 20 years ago. We then had a massive ingress into Iraq and Afghanistan last decade. That eventually mutated to become the al-Qaeda Islamic State split. And now we're looking at the Islamic State being squelched in Iraq and Syria. There'll always be some sort of militant organization there because we can't restore any sort of governance or we have no plan for it. And therefore, this will mutate into what could be a more dangerous scenario, which is not al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. Those are just Washington terms we sort of throw around on CNN because it gives people a label to understand it. We very well may be facing 5 to 7 regional terrorist nodes across the entire world that have varying degrees of connection. They communicate and cooperate when they need to, and then they don't. They may choose different parts of the ideology to pursue, mostly based on local political environments. But the one thing that you can look at across all of these regions is a lack of governance. We thought the Arab Spring would bring about an opportunity for democracy to grow. And as a democratic nation, for some reason, we really helped everyone vote, but we never helped them after voting. And so we have safe havens stretched all the way from Western Africa to Southeast Asia at this point where they can operate. The Islamic State label, they'll pick up that label and use it whenever it's convenient for them. If they think they can pull in money or recruits, they will. But they will pursue their own objectives. The dangerous part for us is when they pursue their own objectives, it creates a capacity and capability problem for us and the U.S. and the globe as an entirety. How do we track that many threats that are out there if they spread?
When we witnessed ISIS just roll up the cities in Iraq, that to me indicated an organization that's pretty strategic.
Absolutely.
They had a game plan and they were able to execute that game plan. That's no fly-by-night. That's just no JV team. Now they're setting up training centers and they're training youth and they're training the next generation. Can anybody speak to the real danger there?
What I would say is that this is going to happen routinely because there's a lack of governance. There's no opposing force. And so we've gotten into a situation where we did clear, hold, and build, let's deploy massive military force last decade at great expense, which ultimately created a security vacuum in itself. And we've retreated to the other end, which is hoping that drones and special operations forces will keep everyone down and sort of keep this problem at bay. In between, in the middle, is how do we work with foreign nations and proxies. And if you look at our competitors around the world, they're picking their proxies as they see fit to pursue the interests they want. Our greatest problem in the United States in counterterrorism is we don't really know what we want. All we know is that we don't want anything bad to happen. And if all you know is what you don't want, you'll never get what you do want. And we haven't picked out what our strategic objectives are. So we're constantly in a patchwork, moving and chasing. The one thing I do like is we are pursuing the threat. I think it's a great testament to our counterterrorists who, over the past 15 years, have gone where the threat is. Our special operations forces have pulled off amazing feats in recent months. But that alone won't get us there. We'll always be vulnerable until we pick out where we want to focus. Right now, I think Libya and North Africa is a place that we need to be very concerned about. That will be a natural expansion point for them. I think Yemen is another big issue as well.
Mr. Rodney, very quickly, Mr. Gartenstein-Ross talked about the difference between big bureaucratic organizations versus small startup companies. I'm one of those small startup companies and know exactly what you're talking about. It's easy to compete against big companies. In your testimony, you talked about the innovation of ISIS.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns, I want you to speak to this, is we know that 2 of the terrorists involved in Brussels in their apartment, we found surveillance videos of a nuclear facility. Can you speak to the dangers and what might be on their minds there?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the dangers you see with the Islamic State is they have been adapting very quickly new methodologies. And so in the field in places like Iraq and Syria, the use of tunnels and multiple sophisticated attack prongs as part of their attack vectors, the use of chemical weapons, reports just today of another chemical attack against some of our allies on the ground, and certainly a real question as to whether or not they have ambitions to engage in WMD terrorism. The reality is they've set up a unit to develop chemical weapons capabilities. They're obviously using it now multiple times.
But let me quick, they have the labs, of really sophisticated labs within universities to access.
That's right. And Mr. Chairman, just to touch on the conversation you were just having, I think one of the major differences from the safe haven of today versus the safe havens of the past is that we're not talking about the jungles and mountains and deserts and the hinterlands of the safe havens of old that we worried about. We're talking about real cities, real urban environments, the second largest city in Iraq, Mukalla in Yemen, which is controlled by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. These are real cities with real resources, real populations, financial systems, all of which they're taking advantage of, to include universities, labs, scientists, and experts, much of which we are blind to. And I think one of the major dangers we have to keep in mind is the safe havens and the ink blots that are emerging that are tied to the Islamic State is qualitatively different, and that's leading to strategic innovation. And you've seen this not just in the context of WMD, potentially, but you've seen it with even naval attacks in Egypt. You saw it with the attack on the civilian aircraft out of the Sinai. And so you're going to continue to see adaptations to the extent that they have fighters to train, they have resources to apply, they have space in which to plan, and leadership that's intent to attack the West.
And by the way, that's the offense I was talking about, is we have to take those resources, that territory, away from them. Senator, Mr. Watts, I want to quick go back because you indicated that as a private citizen, you can do more to identify these individuals than government officials can. Talk about the handcuffs that are actually on government officials from trying to do what we need to do.
I think it's twofold. For example, I teach with the New Jersey State Police a lot and do a lot of programs with intelligence-led policing, counterterrorism. And so you can show them these accounts that are out there wide open. It comes down to two issues. What are the rules around me collecting this information on private citizens? Law enforcement, intelligence, the federal system all have different comfortability with it, so they're not sure whether they should pursue it. The second part is capacity to do it. State and locals could benefit a lot from detecting people online, but have the least capacity to do it. The federal government has the most capacity, the best technology, those sorts of assets, but may have trouble communicating that information down to state and locals. The other part that I would tell you is if I have to go into a government location and do a briefing, it's almost impossible to use the technology just to access the information. All for good reasons, cybersecurity, things like that, physical security, but you almost can't get on the internet to even observe it. It becomes a barrier and you start to look for other ways to do it. Whereas at my house, I can open up my doors, I can just watch what's going on, or I can collaborate with people like David, other people online who are watching this, and we can set up basically our own databases where we tag and track people. As soon as that gets introduced into the government, whether it's bureaucracy, capability, or access, or data privacy reasons, everything tends to go sideways. It becomes very archaic or difficult to do.
Do you see a solution to that still protects American civil liberties?
I do. I think that there just needs to be some sort of legislation or regulation put forth that says if I as a private citizen can observe this activity online, then the federal government, we're going to observe that activity online. The Snowden leaks did nothing for us in terms of helping the government in terms of accessing that information. But I think a more forward approach saying, look, the best way we can secure our nation and safeguard you is if we watch what's going on online. And when people are talking about committing or mobilizing towards violence, then we need to go out and talk to them. But if you can't see that information, or if it's coming to you very delayed, it's really hard to have a preemptive law enforcement approach.
Mr. Zarate, you talked a little bit about really what the goal is. And we held a hearing, really based on Graham Woods, what ISIS really wants. My conclusion is it's really two things. world domination, and they want to set up this apocalyptic final battle. Somewhat conflicting goals. I just want to ask all the panelists, what is behind this? Because it's what is just baffling, I think, to Americans. Al-Qaeda, I think the narrative was they just wanted the West out of the Middle East. This is different. So can you first speak to that? And I just want to go down the panel. What do you think they're after?
Chairman, I think they're the next evolution of the violent Sunni extremist ideology, and they've given life and manifestation to what had once been the mythology of reestablishing the Islamic Caliphate. And so first and foremost, they want to establish not only this caliphate, but demonstrate that they can govern, and actually that this is a place, and this is part of the narrative, where it's the only place where you can practice true Islam. This is part of the attractiveness. And so they've morphed the al-Qaeda narrative, which is the West is at war with Islam, you have a religious obligation to defend it, into this caliphate and the way we are governing it is the only place where you can actually live as a true Muslim. And so it's that in and of itself that is the core of their message. That then animates outward, because their job then is to kill and convert infidels and to project out. And they understand that the West, along with our allies and proxies, will not allow them to do this long term.
You also talked about, again, as long as that caliphate exists, it inspires and it actually prompts different additional type of action. I was interested in you talking about the application process. Kind of sounds like a gang initiation. Can you just quick speak to that? Give us some examples.
Well, what you've seen is that different terrorist groups, the moment that the caliphate was announced, there was a moment of strategic decision for al-Qaeda as well as the al-Qaeda affiliates and other violent extremist groups. And so they had to determine, are we going to be a part of this? Do we believe in it? This is part of the strategic renting and division you've seen between al-Qaeda core and the Islamic State. What a number of groups have done, to include Boko Haram, which was long allied with al-Qaeda, was to then send messages to the Islamic State, initiating membership, in essence, pledging allegiance in the first instance, and then applying to actually be an official province of the Islamic State. You know, this is a reality for them. They see this as a governing reality. And so you've seen this emerge in Libya, in Egypt, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen. You know, these are very real individuals thinking that they are part of something bigger than themselves, and that has dangerous implications, because they have to prove that they're worthy, which is why you've seen these attacks in the hinterlands of places like Jakarta, with people trying to be a part of this broader caliphate. It's animating the movement, and it's resurrecting these networks, both funding and operational, that we'd long suppressed.
So the inescapable conclusion of this, from my standpoint, if you really want to go on offense versus continue to stay on defense, where defense is incredibly difficult, almost impossible, is don't you have to destroy that caliphate? Don't you have to deny them that territory? Mr. Gardenstein-Ross.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's been mentioned, including by Clint earlier in the hearing, that messaging that diffuses their image, which I call a winner's message, is very important. And the ammunition is there to do that. Absolutely, if they lose their caliphate, they have some explaining to do, as one would say, because you have at least a couple of different kinds of people who are recruited to the Islamic State, those who are heavily ideological and those who are more criminal elements, as it was framed before. But for both of them, if the caliphate is lost, those who are more ideological will understand that quick loss of the caliphate really destroys ISIS's interpretation of Islamic prophecy. Those who are more criminal elements will just see them as losers. And ultimately, they've experienced a lot of losses. Now, right now, they're not weak in terms of messaging. They just carried out a couple of major attacks in 4 months. But one thing that our messaging apparatus has done poorly is broadcasting those losses that they've experienced in the Sahel region, in Afghanistan, in Algeria, where their entire branch got wiped out, and elsewhere. And a lot of that comes back to the bureaucracy question, which we've raised, that sometimes when you look at our messaging apparatus, for some parts of the messaging apparatus, it's highly bureaucratized, how you even have a tweet approved. For others, there are theater limitations where they can't go beyond their immediate theater, which hinders the strategy of our messaging.
But again, messaging is all about reality, and the reality is the caliphate remains. Sure, we've been nibbling away at it. As has been described, the network is growing. They're actually gone from inspiring to directing. So the reality is they're not losing yet, or they haven't lost. They have not lost yet.
Oh, absolutely.
And I would argue that until they are overtly losing, where the reality is such, they're going to continue to inspire, they'll continue to direct, the threat continues to grow.
Sir, I agree with you entirely, but I would add one thing, that ultimately, ISIS has understood in particular the potential of social media to mobilize people to carry out attacks, and part of that is around an image of strength. They have and have had more of an image of strength in certain theaters than is justified. I mean, if you look back to how they convinced Boko Haram to join their network, a part of that story is convincing people, contrary to actual facts on the ground, that they controlled the city of Derna in Libya, which they never did. Like, ultimately, as they start to lose more, I think it's in our interest to be able to amplify that message of their losses, because that will hit them doubly hard. In addition to losses on the ground, they'll have more trouble drawing in recruits. And that's why I think we need to think about getting our messaging right, not because it's a panacea now, but because, as you say, when they do start to lose the caliphate, we want to be able to put that out in a method that is effective.
Okay. I'll give you all a chance to have some final thoughts at the end of this, but I want to be respectful of my ranking member's time.